and welcome to this episode of Watch Science. I am Michael Michaels, lead watchmaker for A Watch You Want. We have kind of a fun thing we're going to do today. We're going to tear apart a Dubois Depraz Modular Chronograph. Now this is something that a lot of watchmakers, if not trained on, if they haven't done them, they're not comfortable with them, they tend to stay away from them. And we've talked about this. I talked about this with Tim, a lot, as far as how easy they are to service if you know what you're servicing, if you know what you're doing. So we did a teardown of a Ulysse Nardin Maxi, and we're going to get right into it on this one. We're going to start the teardown of it, and we're going to go through a couple of the hot points. The first thing I actually want to show on this is this is actually an exploded view of what we're working on. And this is what we have to work on when we're tearing these watches down and putting them back together. And this is actually an assembly diagram. This is directly from the manufacturer. It's the assembly diagram along with the lubrication points. And when you talk about the watchmakers and how technical we have to be, these are the charts we have to use. This is literally a one-page chart for the entire module. And if you really don't know how it goes together or what the parts do, where they go, you're not going to see it. It's not going to make any sense to you whatsoever. And with that, we are going to get right into this. And we are going to start just with the hand removal with the dial protection. And let's call the video up there. Give me 1 second. Let's try that again. And do we have the video? Okay. The dial, give me 1 second. Part of what we're doing is we are trying to show the exact, there we go, okay. And we're going to start that right there. This is we're just removing the hands, and this is my technique for removing the hands. Other watchmakers use different techniques. I don't like the Presto pullers. We'll talk about that in later episodes. I like hand levers. I already have the chronograph hand off, and this is just dial protection that I use. And as you see, I'm not really touching any of the parts. I pry the hands off, I dump them off. The hands will be taken, they'll be put into a capsule. Everything's protected. We just don't want any kind of oils, anything to contact the hands. And people even last week mentioned the use of dial protection, and we'll get into that later in the show. Exactly when we have to use that and when we decide not to. I'm going to jump forward here just a little bit. We're going to pull the rest of the hands off here and actually get underneath the dial. And here we are pulling the hour-minute hand off just as carefully as can be. No marks on the dials, just completely unacceptable. If you look at your watches, if you see anything, if you're looking to buy a pre-owned watch, examine your dials. And that'll tell you, examine the dial, you examine the hands, because you want to see if there's anything wrong with that dial. Primarily, what we want to look for are in this area, right here and right here. And if you see any kind of pry marks whatsoever in those areas, or you see the hands, you look in the hands. If you see them cupped up or bent up, that means those hands have been pried off by an unskilled watchmaker. And that's the kind of stuff, if they did that, if they weren't careful enough to do that and replace the hands if they are damaged, then you don't want to buy that watch because you don't know what's going on underneath that dial. So let's continue on here, and we're going to go ahead and remove the dial. We're going to put the hands away, and we're going to jump forward here a second and actually remove that dial. And then we're going to get into the fun of this movement. And this is one of the things, I work on these all the time. I really enjoy working on this particular execution. And whether it's in a Ulysse Nardin, if it's in an AP, if it's in a Breitling, Omega, doesn't matter. It's the parts are all the same. The finish is different. AP finishes the parts just beautifully, but everything else is the same. It's the same construction. They just change the gearing around. They move stuff around here and there. So we're carefully removing the dial, and there we have it. This is underneath the dial of the Dubois Depraz 2021 module. This is another one of the things that we really have to be careful with, is you saw me retighten the screws. We have 2 dial screws here and here. Those dial screws have to be tight. It's a small screw, and if you forget to tighten those when you're taking the watch apart, You put that into the cleaner, those screws are so small, they're probably going to be gone. They will go through the cleaning baskets, they will come out because they're just so tiny. So that's one of the things we really have to watch for, to always make sure you retighten those screws and you make them tight, very tight. And here I am going to tighten the other one. And as soon as we get that, we'll start pulling the calendar off and everything else. And you'll get to see the inside of the Dubois Depraz module. Okay. You know, the other thing I want to talk about while we're doing this is a lot of watchmakers, you have your modular chronographs, it's a two-layer. You have your module, you have your working power plant underneath it. On this variation, it's a 2892. You see 2892s underneath them. You see in-house GP 3000 movements. You see all kinds of different in-house AP movements. You see all kinds of different stuff powering this same module. A lot of watchmakers will just take that power plant off, service it, and put it back together. That's not the right way to do it. If you don't service this, if you don't service the module, and there's one point inside this module we're going to get into, and we're going to in-depth show you what services, what wears out, the one wear point in this module that actually kill the amplitude when you engage that chronograph. And it's one of the most overlooked things when it comes to watch service, is doing the full service on both the movement and the chronograph itself. And we have our calendar disc off, and again, on AP it would be a little different. Your calendar disc would be underneath, and that's one of the ways to tell you have an AP. And then now we're going to take off the primary bridge, and it's just held on with 3 screws, and then it's just going to open up a whole can of worms. Nothing spring loaded, everything's just wide open on it. It's, like I said, it's actually fun. And this is something else we'll talk about right here. I actually brought some stuff along. We had some questions about sharpening screwdrivers. How often do I sharpen screwdrivers? How often do I do them? I do them all the time, no matter what. Working on a movement, if I don't like the way a screwdriver fits, I'm going to resharpen it. I'm going to reprofile it so it fits the screw I'm trying to take out. I don't want to just go to a different screwdriver because you have to have the right width. You've got to fill that slot. You know, we've talked about that, and just damaged screws are not acceptable in any kind of watch. And the same guy that's going to cup your hands is the same guy that's going to damage your screws. So this is something to just a little bit of care, a little extra care. So we have our screwdriver properly profiled. We're going to go ahead and pull the 3 main screws out, and then we're going to take that bridge off. And the strange thing is, nothing flies here. The bridge just lifts off. It's pretty straightforward. And we have 1, 2, and 3 screws here. And next we're just going to have that module top bridge is going to come right off. And here we go. And there, the bottom side of the bridge. You know, what I checked right there, I looked at the bottom of the bridge because what I'm looking for is actually this piece right here. And this is actually a little wave washer. It's a little cup washer. And it's a tension washer for one of the transmission wheels that goes to the minute recorder. This is the minute recorder right here. And it's a transmission spring, and it actually it centers everything and puts a little bit of tension, and that's what keeps your minute recorder from being jerky. So if you don't have that tension there, then there's no backlash on the gears, and the gears can actually jump. The hands will actually jump as the chronograph's working. So we always want to make sure that's there. Sometimes that will actually stick right in here. It'll actually stick to the bridge depending on how the watch was oiled. So that was the first thing I'm checking to see exactly where it's at. And we just want to make sure it's not attached anywhere. Everything looks good, everything's tight, we are good to go. So we're going to continue on the disassembly. And again, as parts come off, if they go into basket, they go into basket. To me, I put everything else in a thimble in this movement, and we'll even get down to the smallest parts, which is the tiniest jewel here on the chronograph runner itself. And that'll be one of the last pieces we pull out, and it's just an amazingly small jewel. So we're going to go ahead and just continue our disassembly. There's only a couple things that are spring loaded on this. It's very simple springs, and let's see if I could pause it right here. I could show you where I took one of these off, and it's going to be right there. It's going to be right on top of right in here. And this is your continuous second hand. Your continuous second hand here is on 3 o'clock, and we have a little tension spring that leads along the side. It looks like a little paper clip, and there's actually an adjustment when you're putting it back together. It has to have the correct spring tension. It just leans up against the side of that post. So we go ahead and we pull that off, and we check the tension and everything just to make sure everything's good on it, and continue on. And we're just we're taking out the operating levers here. This is actually the start and stop, and we have the start and stop levers. This is our intermediate. That was our intermediate wheel. This is the famous, very famous vertical clutch. We don't want to use that color. This is our very famous vertical clutch right here. And we're going to actually get into this in depth as I pull it out. I have some shots of actually what we do, and different watchmakers treat this differently. Some just clean it, lubricate it, a little bit of 90-10 oil on it. I actually disassemble these. It's only 4 parts. Take it apart. I make sure it's super clean. Put it back together with lubrication where I want it, not where it just kind of flows in. So we will go ahead and continue on. We have that was our minute recorder we took off, and this is going to be the hammer, the operating lever for the hammer. And that's what resets the chronograph. And this is going to be right there, that's our little hammer spring. And we're going to take off this is right here is actually the reset lever. That's the reset start stop lever. So when you're actually pushing your chronograph, and on this movement holder you'll see we have the actual pushers for the start stop and for the reset. So when we function these, when I'm putting it back together, I can actually push these functions and check the functions before I have the watch back together. I can make sure the switches are all interacting correctly, that all the adjustments are correct, even though on this one there's very, very few adjustments. That's what's so nice about them. We don't have any eccentrics to worry about in this watch. I take that back. The only eccentric we have is, we'll get to it, and that's actually for the hammers itself. And that's one of the final assembly points. And we have another brake spring we just took off, and this is just a coupling lever right here that engages and disengages. And actually, this is actually a blocking lever that stops you from resetting the chronograph. If your chronograph is running and you try to reset it, that stands in the way, and it just won't let you reset it. If you force it, what you're going to break is actually the stop lever itself. And we see that quite often. People think flybacks, everything's a flyback, and it's not. And we continue on. And I'm just taking it down layer by layer. I'll get to a certain point, and I'll have to take the intermediate bridge off. Underneath the intermediate bridge, it's a couple wheels are trapped under there, and they're usually there. The wheels are, and I can point to this right here. This is the intermediate bridge, and there's a couple wheels that are right here and right here if you have the hour recorder, and that's the hour recorder at 6. This module does not have the hour recorder at 6. It's a 2021. It just has the minute recorder, your seconds in the center, your minute recorder, and it also has your continuous seconds. So let me clear that out, and we'll continue on. And this is the operating lever for the vertical clutch that I just took off. Let's see if we can get back to that just a second. See if I can get to that. And I lost it a second. Give me once. There we go. There's our little spring. We're going to go back in. We are going to take off. Here it is right here. This is the actual operating lever. So what happens here, this is the operating lever right here. And what that does, it actually takes and compresses or relaxes the vertical clutch. So if it puts tension on that vertical clutch, your chronograph is not running. It just captures the top layer of the 2 wheels. So you have 2 wheels together. One is constantly rotating, and one is either arrested, where it has a spring tension held against it, or it's engaged. And the spring tension is off, which means both those 2 wheels are coupled together, and it's actually driving. And it's driving the rest of the chronograph. This is how the vertical clutch works in the module chronograph. It's a very simple design. It functions. The key, again, is always going to be the cleanliness of the vertical clutch, because the vertical clutch is not serviced properly if it's not clean. Anytime you turn that chronograph off, you're going to have too much drag, because it's actually holding this top half of the wheel, and it's stopping it from engaging everything else. That's a very, very important part here. Again, we have the operating lever. We're going to take this off, and you'll see it has like a little fork on the end of it. And this little fork right here, that fork is exactly what goes up and catches the vertical clutch. And as soon as we get to the vertical clutch, I'm going to go to a cutaway to show what the vertical clutch looks like in pieces. And that's our operating lever, start-stop lever, and I'm just checking security of the rest of the pieces. This is our spring for the start-stop, so when you engage the chronograph and you feel the crunch, this is exactly what you're feeling. You're feeling this jump spring move. And it's different when you're actually working on these and you know what's going on inside of them, and when you're functioning the watch. I'm actually wearing mine today. When you're actually functioning the watch, you turn it on and off, you know what's going on inside the watch. Now this is where we want to talk about this a little bit. This right here is our vertical clutch. And this is a two-piece wheel. It has a wheel on the top, it has a wheel on the bottom, and I'm going to try right here to go ahead into the vertical clutch, and there it is. That is the vertical clutch, and this is how the vertical clutch operates and how the vertical clutch comes apart. It's a very, very ingenious system in my opinion. You have your top wheel here, you have your bottom wheel here. The bottom wheel is always in motion, so this is very important right here to have the proper lubrication. The top wheel is on a hub, and it's either going to be arrested by having, well, let me clear that one. It's either going to be arrested by having pressure from the forks, holding it and capturing that, or it's going to be relaxed. And if when it's relaxed, it's like the arm's just right there. And it's allowing both wheels to turn. When that top wheel turns, and this is the top wheel right here, when this top one turns, that's what's actually engaging the chronograph itself. When this top wheel stopped, when it's arrested, that's what stops the chronograph. So this bottom one is continuously in motion. This is the wheel that is driving the rest of the watch. So it's free spinning until it's told that yes, you're allowed to engage. So imagine just having something there that's just putting so much drag on a watch if it's not oiled properly. On the other side, we have a breakdown. This is actually the hub that it's on. We have the first wheel, this is the second wheel, we have a tension spring, and this holds everything together. We put it together, shown over here. On the right, this is the Horia tool. We press it together after it's been lubricated, and this is, in my opinion, this is the best way to ensure that we have the proper lubrication in any of these. So let's go back to the video, and hopefully we're going to be right where we left off. Up. Where are we? Let me pause it a second and see if I could jump. There we go. And we're right back where we were. And there we are. Got it. Okay, we're taking off more intermediate wheels, and it's essentially all they are. It's just power transmission wheels driving the chronograph and telling everything else what to do. That's an intermediate wheel I just took off right there. I'm going to get to another wheel down below that's also an extremely, extremely important point in this module. And right now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to remove the start-stop lever. And the start-stop lever is actually held on with a little C-clip. It's a brass clip that is actually pressed on. And we have a little operating lever underneath that as well that you'll see right in here. And we're going to go ahead and lift it off. Thank you, CQ. We got the whole breakdown here. And we're going to go a little further. We're taking the operating lever spring. This is another very important part. We're going to go ahead and take out, where are we at? The operating lever spring is actually where you feel it returns, it's a return spring for both the operating lever and the hammer, and for the reset lever. This is the intermediate bridge I talked about. We have a very important part underneath this intermediate bridge that I really want to capture. I know I captured it on the video. I don't know how well it's going to transmit or come across as to how clear it's going to be. But as soon as we get this bridge off, we're going to have one thing we have to really pay attention to, and it's this pipe right here. This pipe is where the chronograph hand is coming through. There's your chronograph post. The wheel itself underneath it is a slip wheel. So it's a jeweled wheel. On the early DD modules, it was not jeweled, it was bushed. So we didn't have to worry about this. So I'm talking very early models. I rarely see those. Anytime we do see those, we actually try to upgrade those and put a jeweled module in. So this is going to be, there's a jewel underneath here that actually holds that pivot that centers it. So we're going to get to that in just a second, and I'm going to try to focus and highlight that as soon as I get to it. And we're lifting off here, and as soon as we have the last screw out. And people talk about screws too. I've done enough of these modules, I know what screw goes in what place. There are probably, I don't even remember looking to see how many different ones there are, but all the screws, they only go in one place. You have different heights depending on your application, depending on if you have a calendar, if you don't have a calendar, because they actually use some of the screws for dial height as a dial support. So it's very important that the screw goes in the right place. There's only one screw that I remember that if you put it in the wrong place, I don't think it's actually on this application, though it's on one of the more complex modules. But this is where the jewel is. And I'm going to come right in here and try to emphasize the importance of it, because it is right inside there. There is a jewel, and that jewel keeps the pivot right here. It balances that pivot and keeps it directly straight up. Also reduces the friction, because the idea of jewels is it's harder than the metal. You have a polished jewel with a harder, it's just a harder surface than the steel. That's what we use to reduce the friction, instead of having steel on steel when the chronograph is running. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to remove that jewel out of there. Actually, I take that back. The jewel right here is on the hub. And a lot of times it'll stay either or. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to emphasize this because I know I pulled it out just to be able to show everybody. And here it is. I'm taking it out of the bridge. I was right about that. And we're going to go ahead and pull it out. And it's a very, very delicate. The jewel itself isn't delicate, but the size of it. You know, I mentioned last week, you know, we talk about fly shit. This is fly shit. That is a jewel sitting on the end of there, and that is actually a floating jewel. So if you're not careful with this, it's gone. Good luck finding it. There's no jewel magnet, so you can't look for it, anything like that. A lot of people treat it different. Some people will keep it. They'll put it in a piece of Rodeco and tuck it aside. I want it cleaned. I go ahead and I throw it right in this little thimble right here, and I've yet to lose one. And the way I always tell my watchmakers, if you put it in there and you lose it, I'm not going to be pissed off. So because we've just done so many of these modules, and we're pretty much confident that we're not going to lose it. But this is an extremely critical part that we cannot lose. Otherwise, as soon as you engage that chronograph, it's going to have too much friction. The second hand's going to jump all over the place. It's not going to have any support on the top. So this is one of the things I've seen people forget, because if we go ahead and throw that big bridge into a cleaning basket without removing the jewel, it's going to be gone, and you're never going to find it. So I'm just trying to show some emphasis on this. It is a small piece, and we're just going to go ahead and again, I put it right into the cleaning basket. I have no fear about that at all. Now our bridge is clean. And then we just continue on. And we're going to get to another very, very important point in this module. And one thing I want to emphasize, when I'm taking this module apart, I still have the 2892 base underneath it, which you're going to see the drive in a second. I take it apart as it's all together. Sometimes I'll take them apart as they're together to isolate issues. If I have an amplitude loss, I'm going to actually put it on a time machine as I take it apart to find out what layer, at what point I actually have the amplitude loss. It's part of diagnosis when a watch is coming apart. You're checking end shakes. You're checking different components, not just for wear. You just don't want to be a robot and take stuff apart. You want to be able to actually look at it and see how points are wearing, how the parts are wearing. Look for any kind of flaws as you're taking it apart, because then you can address that going back together. There's different ways. A lot of watchmakers will want to adjust end shakes as the watch is coming down. I see a good and a bad side of that. The good side is once the watch is cleaned and you're using your finger cuts and you're putting it back together, then you don't have to worry about any kind of oils, anything by handling the watch, by handling the bridges. But what I don't like is you can have, a lot of times you could have crust and you can have dry oil on these. Where are we at? There we go. You could have dry oil on here, and that'll give you a false indication of your end shakes. So once the watch is clean, you still have to recheck those end shakes. And we are going to get to this point right here. And this is the main drive in the Dubois Depraz modules. All the modules have the same one. They all operate the same, regardless if it's a 2000 series, the 10,000 series. Any of the modules, they all run off the same thing. It's the exact same part. It's the same component in either module, the big module, the small module. This is actually considered the big module. So it's the same thing. This is the main drive, and this is actually being driven right now off of, I'll clear that out. It's being driven off the second hand of the 2892. And that's why I leave this together, and I wanted to leave this one together as the teardown, especially to emphasize the 2892 is down there and it's continuously driving. The second hand is continuously driving this module. If that doesn't tell you how little friction there is, that a second hand can actually run this whole module. To me, it's just amazing. And this is one of the reasons I love these modules. But one of the problems we have with this, and when I talk about the wear points, this is the one wear point. And it's the hub that this jewel is on, or this jewel, because the wheel is actually jeweled. So I'm actually going to lift it off the piece of rotocoat because it sits down into a well. And we're going to lift it off. And if we stop right here, we have a jewel right here that it rides on. We have 4 little jewels that it actually rides on as a surface. They look like little cap jewels that it rides on as a surface. And then the main issue and the big problem here is going to be this black dot in the middle, because that right there is actually the full bearing. And we change those bearings out a lot. If we see any kind of wear on them, we see if any kind of amplitude problems, I am going to change this out. This is the most emphasis that I could put on it. The new ones, they have it's a brass, I want to believe it's a bronze coating. This module actually had black. A lot of them, you'll see black or bronze. Again, if we have any kind of amplitude problems, this is what we change. This is where the problem is. Between this wheel and that bushing, we have to have complete freedom on that, because again, it's being driven by this right here. It's being driven by the second hand. It's a direct couple between it, the second hand and the primary drive wheel. Continuously in motion, continuously robbing power. So we'll check that. On this one, I actually am going to change this. And we're just about done, because I know we're just doing a teardown on this one. On a later episode, we are going to do the complete reassembly and adjustment on this as well. And I put this one back. This is one of the screws. It's an oddball screw. I don't see any reason, why we have to take it off. And that, for the most part, is the module torn down. I'm closing everything up, but at the same time, our emphasis is we have our calendar drive over here. That's going to stay on there. There's no point to take it off. We have our stop lever, or reset lever, not a stop lever. Don't try to use it as a stop lever. And right here, this is our brake for the hour, or for the minute recorder. It just puts a little bit of tension on the idler wheels. I'm sorry, for the hour recorder. This one doesn't even have the drive for it. So the parts there, we don't even use it. So, and that's it. Again, inside the thimble, I have all my parts, I have all my screws, everything's together. I'm not worried about this one. I use a separate, larger basket for all the brass wheels, and because I don't like the brass to be in contact with the steel. And as you can see, I still have the 2892 base model on here, base module, and I'm going to go ahead and do a complete teardown of that as well. Not going to bore you with that on this one. We're just going to go ahead, we wanted to stick mainly to the DD modules. But that was it. We had a lot of questions about getting into more complex watches. I thought this would be a good way to start because I'm very, very familiar, very comfortable in doing these. And I wanted to ask everybody, let me know if you have any questions. You can write in, we're live right now. If you have any questions, please be sure to write in and throw anything out. And I'll do my best to answer them on the air. Speaking of that, we did have questions come in from the episode a few weeks ago. And there's a couple I want to touch on. If we could start, we could bring up the first question. And there we go. We talked about automatic watches, and I brought in a little video of the automatic function for the Rolex, and it's a bi-directional. Well, I had a couple questions come in, and the question was, Rolex is bi-directional, but a 7750 is unidirectional. It's one direction, which means it free spins the other direction. I thought this would be a great way to demonstrate and actually demonstrate live exactly what the 7750 does using the same tool, and showing you, why I don't like winders, number one, but at the same time, I can show you and explain the difference between a watch that has no power on it, full power, and then one of the great flaws in the 7750, which is the ratchet drive wheel fractures. So we're going to go to that right now, and if we can come over here, there we are. We have a 7750. Obviously, this one's out of a tutor, and this one has no power on it right now. I've let all the power down with the automatic on. So I'm going to go ahead and just release it, and you can see how smooth everything is operating. So we have just complete freedom. This is beautiful. We're winding one direction, and you can actually see the way it's winding because it hangs up. It's not as free. You can see it'll hold a little bit of a tilt. But what I want to do is I want to back off here a second, and I want to put full power on this watch. And then I want to show you exactly what happens when it's at full power and it's on the winder. And this is going to demonstrate two things. It's going to demonstrate both the automatic function at full power, the resistance it has, and why automatic parts can wear out, which is the reason I don't like automatics. But more important, I want to be able to emphasize what goes on inside the 7750 and where they break sometimes. So I'm actually winding the watch. I can hear the bridle slipping, the bridle inside the mainspring slipping. So I know I'm at full power. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to try to tuck it back in here. And we're going to go back to our plane. Now, when we see this, we're actually at 19 degrees for this. So when we see this, okay, we're free spinning right there. However, that's our drive position. So when we get into our drive position, it's going along for the ride. So that's at full power, and that's demonstrating how much strain is on all those automatic components. Now we go the other way, it's free spinning. Okay, so this is our single direction wind. Now what's going to happen though, and where we have a problem with this, because the 7750 has such a large mass, there it goes, right there is the problem. When it backs up the other way, the mass can actually fracture the ratchet drive wheel. And as you can see, it's hung up right now, and just one shock the wrong way, and it could just snap that wheel. They've gotten much better in the construction of the wheels. The wheel's actually made out of bronze now, so it's a lot stronger. But again, I wanted to bring this in just to emphasize more of the dynamics that go on inside of an automatic. I know the last video I had, I thought it did a great example of showing the bi-directional, both power off and power on, of being able to bring this tool in and actually show you a watch, live on the air. I think it just kind of gives a different dynamic to it. Again, don't like automatic winders. That's one of the reasons. It just wears the watches out. It puts too much strain on the automatic components. We did have another question as far as dive watches. And there it is right there. Why are the movements so thick? The movements are thick in a dive watch. Yes, in both Breitling and Omega. The BO1 is relatively thick. The Omega is relatively thick movement as well. However, you have a large case thickness as well, and that's where you get your depth from. You have a very, very thick crystal, sometimes 2, 3, 4 millimeters thick, and also your case back is also thick. So they have to make the case back thick, they have to make the crystal thick because of compression. And even though you have a dive watch, to be certified at a certain at a certain depth, those watches have to be physically tested to that depth. They've come up with actually 125% of its rated depth, not just its rated depth. So in order to do that, it's more case construction where the case itself, the crystal and the case back, it can be thicker than the movement. Not to say that the movements themselves aren't thick, aren't beefy, which they make more robust, because in a dive watch, you have a strong watch. You want a thicker watch, a more hardier watch. You don't want anything delicate inside of a case like that. So you have two things going on. You have a thick movement, but you also have a massive case, and that's for compression. It has to be able to, the case itself cannot compress. And even in titanium cases, Omega Mix titanium dive watches, Breitling does, the case back is massively thick. So is the crystal. It's a very, very thick crystal. So I hope that answers part of the question. It's not just the movement, it's actually the case construction as well. Okay. Automatics, yes, they have overwinding protection. Yes. We have a question that came in from Pre-Monkey. Can I explain why automatic watches have overwinding protection and manual wind watches do not? We're starting to see this more and more from Petit Philippe. We're seeing it from Roger Dubois. In manual wind watches, we're starting to see clutches put into the crown, where when the watch gets to a certain point, you wind it and the crown actually has the clutch in it, so you can't overwind. And overwind's not technically the technical term for it, it's breaking the mainspring. Because what you're going to do, you have a hooked mainspring and it's just going to shear it off. And that's all it does in a manual wind watch if you overwind it. The crowns, they try to limit the size of the crown on a manual wind watch, so when it's fully wound, you can't turn it anymore. You have to actually struggle to turn it. That's the point, is as soon as that watch gets fully wound, you can't turn it anymore. So we are starting to see protection in the higher end watches, in the higher end manual wind watches, which is a great thing. In the automatics, the protection isn't necessarily protection. It's actually a bridle that's inside the mainspring barrel. And I think that'd be a good topic, and a good discussion one day to actually show and demonstrate some of the differences in the mainsprings. The mainspring itself actually slips inside the barrel. It has a bridle, it's called. Instead of having an end that actually hooks into the barrel itself, it has a second spring piggyback to it. And it puts tension and it just slips inside that barrel, and you can actually feel it when you're winding it. If it's in a case, it's a little harder to feel sometimes. If you know what you're looking for, you can feel it. 7750 is a very easy one to feel. Some other models, Rolex is actually difficult because of the TEPA grease they use. They use a smoother grease to actually reduce amplitude because they don't want it to bite as much. So, to answer your question, yes, they're starting to use it. I love that they're using it. And to me, manual wind watches, I still love them because it harkens back to the old watch. It's the traditional way. And I will say one thing too, and this is a little shout out to Tim Masso. The Futurematic, the Jaeger-LeCoultre Futurematic, was one of the only watches that I had worked on. It's an automatic timepiece with a hooked mainspring. And when that watch gets fully wound, it actually decouples the automatic. So it's one of those, it's one of those little idiosyncrasies of, somebody else's better idea, but nobody else went with it, that I'm aware of. So it's just one of those fun things. We also had a question about screwdrivers and the proper way to fit and finish screwdrivers. I brought along a few tools here, and this actually is, if we can get over here a second, this is actually my go-to. And it's a small Fordham screwdriver sharpener. I do everything by hand. I do use all my screwdrivers by hand. I do a sideways polish on them. I do a sideways bolt and then do the tip. That's it. And I'm constantly doing this. You saw me do it in the video. I'm constantly using this. It's a mainstay on my bench. It's always there. It is my go-to tool. They're relatively inexpensive. You can find them in any supply house. This has quickly become my favorite tool. However, we do have something a little more elaborate. And this is a hollow ground screwdriver sharpener, which I'm going to actually, we're going to put together a video probably for the next episode of this, of actually what this does, and have some nice close-up microscope shots of the blade. What this does, it sharpens both sides of the blade at the same time, but the way it sharpens it, it's actually a curved hook. And the idea there is the screwdrivers, we never want them to bottom out. You know, we talked about that. We don't want them to bottom out at the bottom of the screw. We want them to bite in the sides. And so this gives a very, very clean profile and makes a very strong blade. It's not easily adjustable. I really like going back to that because I can use it all the time. And again, as long as you sharpen your screwdrivers, I'm doing mine every day. I do it multiple times a day. I'll sharpen the same screwdriver 3-4 different times to fit 3-4 different screws. So those are a couple things on screwdrivers. And that's pretty much it. You know, again, I want everyone to send in their questions. We had a great response from 2 weeks ago. You know, we're all getting better at this. We're you know, hopefully breaking through at this. And I just thank you. And this has been a lot of fun. And we have one thing I want to emphasize too. We had one question that I really want to emphasize. Somebody asked, actually multiple people asked, about doing a restoration on Omega 321. We are going to end up doing that in a 4 to 5 part series where we're going to do a teardown, we're going to do a restoration with refinishing of the parts, screws, bridges, levers. We're going to do a reassembly, we're going to do case rebuilding, and we're going to put this whole thing together, and it's going to be, so look for that in coming up episodes. Send in ideas, send in questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. So with that, I'm Michael Michaels. This is Watch Science, and I'm out.